There is a fear that Harry has never said out loud in public. He has said many things out loud in public, about his childhood, about his grief, about the institution that raised him and the press that he believes destroyed his mother. He has said them in courtrooms and on Netflix, and in a 416-page memoir that became the fastest-selling non-fiction book in British publishing history. He has said them sitting across from Oprah Winfrey in a garden in Santa Barbara while the world watched. And he has said them from the witness stand inside the Royal Courts of Justice in London, with his voice cracking and his hands steady, and the cameras lined up outside in the cold. But this fear, the one that according to multiple sources is now driving nearly every strategic decision the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are making in the spring of 2026, has never been given words in an interview, in a press release, or in a carefully worded spokesperson statement released to the wire services. The fear is this: when Prince William becomes King of England, he will strip Harry and Meghan of their titles. Not quietly, not as a private family matter resolved behind the closed doors of a Scottish estate. Publicly, formally, and irreversibly. And the moment that happens, the entire architecture of the Sussex brand, every speaking fee collected, every retreat ticket sold, every product drop announced, every Netflix pitch assembled, every diplomatic photo opportunity staged from Nigeria to Jordan to Australia collapses. Because without the title, there is no Duke. Without the Duke, there is no Duchess. And without the Duchess, there is no, as ever, no Archewell. No Her Best Life retreat headliner charging $3,000 a seat on the Sydney waterfront. There is just a California couple with a complicated story that the rest of the world has already largely, quietly moved on from. That is the nuclear scenario. And according to people close to the situation, it is no longer theoretical. Let us start at the source of this specific chapter of the story, because context is everything here. On March 26, 2026, just days from now, a book will be officially released in the United Kingdom and the United States. It is called Betrayal, Power, Deceit, and the Fight for the Future of the Royal Family. The author is Tom Bower, a 79-year-old British investigative journalist whose previous biographies of Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, Richard Branson, and Rupert Murdoch himself have made him one of the most feared chroniclers of powerful institutions and the people who run them. His 2022 book on the Sussexes, Revenge, was a bestseller. Betrayal is already #1 on Amazon before a single copy has been placed on a shelf. The headline that travelled fastest from the book's serialised excerpts in the Times of London was the brainwashing allegation, Queen Camilla allegedly telling a friend that Meghan had brainwashed Harry. 6 words, attributed to the Queen of England, printed in a book with a #1 bestseller ranking, and the Sussex camp had no clean way to respond to them. Their spokesperson called the claims deranged conspiracy theories. They attacked Bower's methodology. They called it fixation. What they did not do, and this is worth noticing precisely, was deny that the confrontation described in the book ever took place, or specifically state that the conversation attributed to Queen Camilla was never had. The rebuttal challenged the messenger's credibility. It did not dismantle the message. That is a strategic choice. And strategic choices in official communication always tell you something about what the people making them believe they can and cannot defend. But the brainwashing claim is not the detail that is keeping the Sussex inner circle awake at night. The detail that matters is buried slightly deeper in the Bower account, and it has received considerably less coverage than the Camilla quote in the days since the excerpts were published. According to Bower's sources, Harry is now genuinely and acutely afraid that once William ascends to the throne, his brother could strip him and Meghan of their remaining royal titles and permanently distance them from Britain. Read that sentence again carefully. A prince, a man who stood in a London courtroom in January of this year and fought one of the most consequential press freedom cases in modern British legal history, is afraid that his own brother, the future King of England, is planning to take away the last thing of real institutional value that he and his wife still own. To understand why that fear is rational rather than paranoid, you have to understand what those two words, Duke, Duchess, are actually worth in commercial terms in 2026. When Harry and Meghan left the royal family in January of 2020, they carried almost nothing tangible out the door. No salary, no Frogmore cottage, no Metropolitan Police protection detail, no sovereign grant funding. The late Queen Elizabeth II had been clear, and the palace documentation had been precise. They were stepping back from the working royal structure. They were surrendering the offices, the annual funding, the public functions, the official mandate. What they retained, and this is the transaction that has defined every business decision they have made since, was the name, the history, the cultural weight of two words that open doors and fill conference rooms and sell out luxury retreats at $3,000 a ticket. Without the Sussex titles, Harry is a 41-year-old British man with a military background, a complicated relationship with his family, and a documented history of trauma. That is a person with a story. It is not, on its own, a globally scalable commercial brand. Without the Duchess title, Meghan is a former American actress who ran a lifestyle blog in the early 2000s, married into the British royal family, and left under controversial circumstances. That is a person with significant name recognition. It is not, on its own, sufficient to justify charging $3,199 for a group photograph at a beachfront hotel in Sydney. The titles are not the icing on the Sussex commercial operation. The titles are the foundation, and the foundation is, at least theoretically, revocable. Now let us look at what is actually happening to that commercial operation in the spring of 2026, because the financial picture matters for understanding why the title threat is existential rather than merely uncomfortable. In 2020, when Harry and Meghan signed with Netflix, the deal was reported at somewhere between $80 and $100 million. That was not just a content agreement. That was a statement of market value. That was Netflix, the most powerful streaming company on earth, effectively putting a price tag on the Sussex cultural brand and declaring it worth 9 figures. For a couple who had just voluntarily surrendered their royal salaries and public funding, that number was more than financial security. It was institutional validation. It said that what they carried with them out of the palace had real commercial weight. 6 years later, the picture looks considerably different. The Netflix deal has been downgraded from an overall arrangement, in which Archewell was paid a guaranteed flat sum, to a first-look deal, in which Netflix can simply decline any project they bring forward. Harry's Polo documentary was ranked 3,436th out of all Netflix shows for the first half of last year. The lifestyle show, With Love, Meghan, which debuted in March 2025 and was supposed to function simultaneously as a platform for the As Ever brand, received a 23% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes and did not receive a third season renewal. And on March 6th of this year, Netflix announced it was withdrawing entirely as an equity partner in As Ever, Meghan's lifestyle brand. The official statement from Netflix was carefully worded in the way that corporate statements always are when the underlying reality is uncomfortable. A spokesperson said that Meghan's passion for elevating everyday moments had inspired the creation of the brand, and that Netflix was glad to have played a role in bringing that vision to life. The phrase that did the most work in that statement was this: "As it was always intended." As it was always intended, Netflix said, Meghan will continue growing the brand independently. That is the corporate equivalent of saying, we plan to leave all along, so the fact that we are leaving means nothing went wrong. Every person in the entertainment industry who read that statement understood exactly what it meant. But it was not just the Netflix exit that defined the moment. It was what a website glitch revealed underneath the carefully managed public narrative of the As Ever brand. In early 2026, Reddit users discovered that by adding items to the As Ever shopping cart in large quantities, the website would respond by revealing actual maximum available inventory. The numbers that briefly appeared before the glitch was corrected were extraordinary. Approximately 220,000 unsold jars of jam, 30,000 jars of honey, 90,000 candles, 80,000 tins of flower petal sprinkles, roughly 70,000 bottles of wine, including rosé, Sauvignon Blanc, and sparkling brew. One user calculated the wholesale value of the unsold inventory at over $4 million. The brand spokesperson denied any crisis and said the inventory was primarily being held for promotional purposes, including gifting and sampling. Around the same time, a separate report confirmed that 2 storage rooms at Netflix's Hollywood campus held As Ever products freely available to staff, with one employee reportedly walking out with 10 items at no charge. You do not give away hundreds of thousands of units to employees when the product is moving organically off shelves. You give away inventory when you cannot sell it. And then there is the Archewell Foundation, the charitable arm that Harry and Meghan built as the institutional expression of their values and their humanitarian purpose. In 2021, the foundation raised $13 million in donations. In 2024, it raised $2.1 million against expenses and grants of $5.1 million, a $2.5 million deficit. That filing was made public on December 20th, 2025. Donors are not indefinitely patient with organizations that show persistent deficits alongside persistent leadership instability. The money follows confidence, and the confidence has been draining steadily for 3 years. The staffing picture tells the same story from a different angle. Meredith Maines, who departed in December 2025, was the couple's 11th publicist in a 5-year span. She lasted approximately 10 months. James Holt, Harry's closest professional ally and the longest-serving employee in the Sussex operation, resigned as executive director of the foundation that same month, citing a desire to return to England with his family. His departure, combined with the simultaneous layoff of a large majority of Archewell Philanthropy's staff, sent a clear signal to everyone in the industry who was paying attention. A source told celebrity reporter Rob Shooter directly, "This is not strategy, this is survival." Another source provided what may be the single most precise summary of the Sussex operation in 2026, saying they tried to recreate the royal court, but California does not do crowns on credit. Now, hold all of that, the financial decline, the staffing collapse, the inventory crisis, the Netflix downgrade, and place it next to the title fear that Bauer's book has exposed. Because the connection between the two is not coincidental, it is causal. The Sussex commercial operation is showing serious structural stress at precisely the moment when the long-term security of the brand asset that underlies the entire operation is most in question. Harry and Meghan are not just managing a difficult business cycle, they are racing against an institutional clock whose hands are controlled by a man who has not visited Australia since 2014, and who has, according to multiple sources, been clear in his private views about what the Sussex operation has cost the monarchy. This is why Australia matters so much right now, and why the timing of the April trip needs to be understood not as a speaking tour, but as a strategic deployment. On March 8, 2026, the Sussex team announced that Harry and Meghan would visit Australia in mid-April for what their spokesperson described as a number of private, business and philanthropic engagements. The language was measured, deliberately vague: private, business, philanthropic. 3 words chosen to suggest purpose without committing to accountability. Within 24 hours, the actual shape of the trip came into focus, and it told a different story. Harry is scheduled to keynote the Interreg Psychosocial Safety Summit in Melbourne on April 15th and 16th, a 2-day conference on workplace mental health with tickets priced from $2,699 Australian dollars for a platinum table to roughly $2,000 Australian dollars at the entry level, with Harry expected to collect a speaking fee in the range of $50,000. Meghan will headline the Her Best Life retreat in Sydney, a 3-day women's wellness event at the 5-star Intercontinental Coogee Beach, with tickets starting at $2,699 Australian dollars and VIP packages reaching $3,199 Australian dollars. The VIP experience including a group photograph with the Duchess. The event is capped at 300 women. If every ticket sells at the VIP price, gross revenue from ticket sales alone approaches $1 million Australian dollars. At this point, the word philanthropic strains under the weight of the facts. But here is the layer of the Australia story that the commercial framing alone does not fully explain. Multiple sources have now confirmed that cameras will be rolling throughout the trip. The format being discussed internally is described as travel, food, and lifestyle content, a production being pitched, according to one insider, as a love letter to Australia. The entire visit is being treated as a screen test for future projects that can be shopped to streaming platforms other than Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, Apple TV+, Disney+, any number of international streamers who might be persuaded that Meghan can still deliver content that audiences actually want to watch. The Australia trip is not just a revenue event, it is a content production and a market test and a brand deployment and a diplomatic flag-planting exercise, all simultaneously, all in the same 3 weeks. That level of strategic density makes sense only when you understand what is at stake. And what is at stake, beneath all the ticket prices and retreat packages and keynote fees, is the answer to a question that the Bauer book has now forced into plain view. How much longer do the titles last? The answer to that question is ultimately controlled by King Charles in the near term and by William in the long term. Charles has, by all accounts, maintained a complicated but not entirely severed relationship with his younger son. Harry flew to Britain when his father was diagnosed with cancer last year. The two met briefly. Sources described the encounter as warm but constrained. But Charles is 76 years old, and managing a cancer diagnosis while running one of the oldest institutions on earth, his capacity for managing the Sussex situation is limited by his capacity for managing everything else simultaneously. William is a different calculation. He is 43 years old. He is methodical, reportedly strategic in ways his father is not, and according to sources close to the palace, he has not forgiven the Oprah interview, has not forgiven Spare, and has not forgiven the Netflix documentary. He understands, with a precision that only someone who has spent his entire life studying the institutional mechanics of the British monarchy could have, exactly what the Sussex titles cost and what they subsidise. And he understands that the moment he holds the power to address that cost directly, the argument for restraint becomes considerably weaker. That is the constitutional reality that the Bower book has placed on the table in the same news cycle as the Australia announcement, the Netflix exit, the as-ever inventory crisis, and the Archewell Foundation deficit. It is not a coincidence that all of these stories are surfacing simultaneously in March of 2026. These are the pressure points of a brand that is approaching, from multiple directions at once, the limits of what royal adjacency alone can sustain. There are two versions of how this resolves. In the first version, Harry and Meghan use the Australia trip to demonstrate something that no press release or spokesperson statement has been able to demonstrate for the past 2 years. They show up not as celebrities with a price list, but as something that feels, even briefly, genuinely substantive. Harry's conversation at the Melbourne summit connects in a way that transcends speaking circuit mechanics. Meghan's retreat generates content that a platform other than Netflix decides is worth backing. The travel documentary finds a buyer. As ever negotiates Australian retail distribution and begins the slow work of building a consumer base outside the United States. The title question recedes into the background because the operation has demonstrated in concrete commercial terms that it can function independently of William's goodwill. That version is possible, but it requires execution at a level the Sussex operation has not yet demonstrated. But it is possible. In the second version, the optics of the Australia trip harden into permanent record. The security question raised by the 4,500 signature petition, demanding that not 1 cent of Australian taxpayer money be spent on what signatories called a private celebrity visit, receives no clear official response from Canberra. And that silence becomes the precedent that every country on their international circuit can point to going forward. The travel documentary does not find a buyer. As ever, remains a US-only niche brand with an unresolved inventory problem and no major retail distribution partner. The Archewell Foundation files another year of deficit, and William, watching all of this from Kensington Palace, concludes that the argument for protecting the Sussex brand with the institutional weight of the titles is not one that the institution can afford to keep making. In that version, the conversation about the titles stops being theoretical. Here is what makes that second version more than alarmist speculation. The Bower book lands in a political context that is already exceptionally hostile to the Sussex operation. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, who met with King Charles at Balmoral in September of 2025 and specifically named William and Catherine as the royals he hoped to host next, not Harry and Meghan, is himself a declared Republican who has publicly stated he believes an Australian republic is common sense. The Prince Andrew scandal has poisoned the well for the broader royal brand in ways that are still reverberating through Commonwealth public opinion. And Harry is simultaneously fighting a 9-week marathon trial in London against Associated Newspapers, while his wife is in California preparing a luxury retreat for 300 wealthy women. He testified in January. He was in London for weeks. His father and his brother did not come to see him. That is not a scheduling detail. That is a family telling you something without saying it out loud. Tom Bower's account of the brainwashing allegation, of the confrontation between the brothers, of Camilla's private words to a friend, all of this lands into that political and personal landscape not as gossip, but as documentation, as a record of how the people closest to the throne have been privately interpreting the last 6 years of Sussex decision-making. And Buckingham Palace, as it almost always does, declined to comment on the biography. That silence is not neutrality. In institutional communication, silence is always a position. The Australia trip begins in April. The book drops on March 26th. The lawyers are reading contract language at Netflix. The Foundation's next annual filing is already being built. And somewhere in Kensington Palace, a future king who has not been to Australia since 2014 is watching a former prince arrive there first, and is calculating, with the methodical patience that royal training instills in those who endure it, what the appropriate response to all of this is, and when the appropriate moment to deliver it will arrive. Harry knows that calculation is happening. That is the fear he has never said out loud. And Australia, for all its sunshine and its petitions and its $2,000 retreat packages, is ultimately just the stage on which that unspoken fear is being performed in real time, with cameras rolling, with tickets sold, with the world watching, and asking the same question it has been asking for 5 years. What exactly are you, if the name is all that is left? So far, no answer has been given that the numbers support.